Okay, well, we might as well get going.
Yeah. Hello, Hawken.
Well,
Buenos dias.
Well, it's time, council and visitors and staff, we get this meeting started. We welcome you here. We welcome Todd and Noel and Hawken and our McCarthy on our newspaper, television, and Kim with the newspaper. We welcome you and call this meeting to order. Ask Councillor Barfuss to please open with prayer.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here as council and representatives of our community, and pray that we will be guided in the discussions and decisions which we make this time, that we'll be able to put the interests of our community ahead of all others and be able to make decisions that help to move our community forward in a positive way. And for these things we ask Thee for and thank Thee for in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Councillor Barfuss. We hope you had only exercised your God-given right to vote according to how you feel.
We'll just get done early and
additions and adoption of the agenda. I don't have any additions. Is there anybody else that has any additions to the agenda? Councillor Barfuss?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
Thank you. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay, we have a delegation here, Todd Pouland from CIBC Wood Gundy. The reason why he's here is my question. Todd, I want you to be aware of it, that I asked for clarification on some of our terms and investments and so forth, and so Jeff has probably asked you to review those with us.
Yes.
And thank you for being here.
No problem.
We'll give you the floor.
Well, I appreciate the invite. Is there some way we could just dim those lights so that you can maybe see them?
I got it. He's got it.
Thank you very much. It worked out really well. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. It's been a while since I have been down here, so it worked out quite well. I have run into Noelle when she comes to Calgary, and we do the workshop in Toronto. But actually coming down to Cardston has been awesome. This is long overdue, so I appreciate it. What I'm going to do today is provide you a quick overview on how your money is invested, what I do, the process, where your money is today. I want to really provide a good level of transparency so you know exactly where every penny is. You've got a comfort level on how it's being managed. And I'm going to give you a bit of an overview on how I think things are going to go over the next year or so. Just kind of give you a bit of an overview. But the first slide, obviously the first thing that everyone wants to know when I come to town is a rate of return. That's great, but how is our money being managed? Is it safe? And your money is safe. Now, a bit of background. I took over the business about 9 years ago from a gentleman named Hugh McGilvery, who managed the account prior to myself since 1983. So you've had the same investment managers basically going on the better part of that entire period. And so you've got some continuity there. Now, the Municipal Government Act governs how I can manage your money. What's listed here on the screen are short-term ratings for anything that's listed 1 year or less. It goes on a short-term rating, and bond ratings. Now, bond ratings are used anything that's over 1 year. Any obligation that's longer than a year has a bond rating attached to it. If it's less than a year, it's considered money market. Now, what's inside the box there, inside that black box, that's what the Municipal Government Act actually allows you to buy. What's highlighted in red is what I will allow you to buy. We will hold your account to a higher standard than that of the Municipal Government Act, and we always have. There are things within the MGA that I simply won't buy. For example, you're allowed to buy asset-backed commercial paper. I've never bought asset-backed commercial paper, nor will I ever. You're also allowed to buy corporate bonds. I don't buy corporate bonds. We know that at the end of the day, corporations, the guarantee is only as good as the word. And so it's just one of those things where we need to have our money no matter what, and we need the principal, or the security of the principal is number one. And so rate of return always comes secondary. So I actually, the money is invested in a very secure fashion. Everything we buy is fully guaranteed, down to the last penny. And everything we buy is liquid at any time, meaning that we can sell it. I may buy you a 5-year bond, and 6 months later, I may get a phone call saying, we need that money, and I have to have it for you without penalty or out risk, and you have it within 3 days of that phone call. The reason we manage it like that, I've been managing municipal funds the entire time I've been at Wood-Gundy. I've only had one job. It's been 15 years there. I've had a lot of these phone calls where, municipalities, things change. Roads need to get built sooner, or you need the money, different things go on, and the dynamics of each individual municipality are different. There's no model that I can manage your money on that is good for everybody. Your needs are different than everyone. So we actually manage your account. It looks like nobody else's. Your account looks like your account, and it is managed to your needs. So that's kind of in general how it's invested. It's very safe. The funds are accessible whenever you need it. Now on the next page, this is actually a statement, and it looks different than the statement that you actually get. This is something that we can generate. I think it looks better, but it gives you a little bit of a different view on where your money is, and it kind of, from top to bottom, it's basically a list of everything we own on the left side there, all the bonds. Starting at the top, that's cash in the account. We've got about $300 in cash just sitting idle there in the account, but that usually comes due in forms of interest and that sort of thing. And then going down, we've got all of our money in different lines. So the first thing I'm going to point out, we don't manage money in a mutual fund. You don't have a box where you put money in and it's a large pool and you've got like 100 different investments and a bunch of. It's very simple. We know exactly where all of our money is, and line by line I can tell you what's going on. And the reason we do that, if you manage money in a mutual fund, you basically, and if you hold bonds in a mutual fund, you never have a maturity. You're constantly rolling that money over and over and over. And when you own bonds, you want a maturity, especially with interest rate risk. If rates start to rise on us, we want a bond that comes due at a certain point in time. I don't want that infinite risk of it just floating out there. So we own individual bonds. We have that control. Now, we only own bonds that are issued by 3 entities: the federal government, any of the provincial governments, or a crown corporation, or the 6 main Canadian banks, that being the 5 charter banks and National Bank of Canada. That's it. We will only buy from those entities, and we will only buy fully guaranteed investments. So when we're buying within that box, it's pretty simple. We're not worried about credit risk or defaults and things like that. That's not an issue for us. What we are worried about is our rate of return. And
I was just wondering, Todd, why you don't invest in other banking institutions. Is there a credit risk there, or is it just your preference?
There's a credit and a liquidity risk, mostly liquidity. The smaller the institution, and I'll give you an example. I'll step back here and say that we have done provincially guaranteed credit union investments, and will do that. I don't particularly like to buy small town credit union GIC, but sometimes the rates are enough to make us move. Now, the only reason I would do that is because it's fully guaranteed by the province, and no matter what happens, we get our money back. But the problem with that, and we've seen this happen before, fully guaranteed credit unions can go bankrupt. And you get your money back, but you'll get it back 2 to 3 years later. So liquidity risk is a big deal for me. And so it's a very excellent question. The 6 institutions and the federal and provincial governments that were allowed, or that I will buy from, there is liquid at any time, so I can get a phone call and I can have your money within seconds. I can't quite do that with the credit unions. I'll give you an example. I had a client, this was a number of years ago, who called me up and said, I got a credit union locally called me and said they had a rate that was like double what you were offering me. And we did some homework, and it was true. And I don't know where the credit union was getting because obviously to offer that rate, they've gone and invested your money somewhere else, and they've made a profit on it. Well, it was a risky rate of return. And when you did some homework, you looked at the balance sheet of that particular credit union, the client's deposit was about 75% of the entire credit union. You can't get your money out when that's the case. So we have to have, getting back to your question, it's safety and liquidity.
Thank you.
We only buy those particular bonds, and the one model that is the same with your account than it is for the rest of my municipal government client accounts, I won't buy bonds longer than 6 years at this point. When this account was first taken over, we'd have stuff that was 10 years. Some of it, we've had 15-year bonds in here before. I'm sure before my time, back in the the 80s when interest rates were double digits and they were coming down, you probably had 20 and 25-year bonds in this account. Those days are long, long gone. You will only have things that are within that 6-year window. And in fact, the money that we have in the account right now is not equally, but it's fairly equally laddered, where you have an equal amount of money generally coming due every year for the next 6 years. We've spread it out. We don't have a large concentration in one year or another. We've tried to spread out our maturities so that we've got a little bit coming due every year. Now, the reason we do that, interest rates are at all-time lows. And will they go any lower? Maybe. Maybe. There's a chance we get another rate cut this year, but bottom line is we're pretty much at the bottom. The risk here is that rates are going to go up. When you own bonds, that's what you don't want. And so we have to have our money coming due in a fairly short period of time, that if interest rates start going up, well, we've got money coming due every year that we're going to roll over at that higher rate. My mentor, the guy that used to manage this account, Hugh McGilvery, told me a story on my first day on the job, and it was one that I still use. He had a client in the 70s and 80s when interest rates were double digits, and in the 70s when inflation was rampant. And you could walk into CIBC and get 14% 3-month deposits and crazy numbers. He had a widow client, and she had $300,000 to her name. And interest rates were going up every year. She had no risk tolerance, didn't want to buy the stock market. And she took her money and did something simple. She took $100 grand and bought a 1-year GIC, $100 grand and bought a 2-year GIC, and the last one and bought a 3-year GIC. And every year she'd roll a third of her money at the next best rate. That simple strategy, that simple, we call it a bond ladder, outperformed most of Wall Street. And that's what we have to do, is that I got to keep it simple. I don't think rates are coming up anytime soon, but when they do, they're going to catch us all by surprise. I just have to make you money. So I'm going to err on the conservative side of things, and I always have. So that's so all of our bonds come due within this window. Some of the maturity dates on these look a little bit longer, but don't sweat it. They're all 4, 5, 6-year bonds. Nothing longer than that. The rate of return on the last 12 months, and this is a rolling 12-month average, so was 4%. Pretty good rate of return. I'm not. We used to be able to do 5 and 6, and if you look at the longer term since 1983, it's probably much higher than that, maybe even closer to 6, 6.5. Bottom line is a 5-year bond today, if I were to go out and buy a 5-year Canadian bank bond, doesn't matter which bond or which bank, about 1.8%. So if we're locking in a 5-year bond at 1.8%, anything north of that, we're doing just fine. My job is simple. I have to do a better rate of return than you can get at your local bank, but with the same security and the same liquidity. Treat me like a local bank. You still have access to the money when you need it, but I have to do better. So 4%'s not bad. The problem I have for you, I'm going to pour cold water on that, it's going to come down. The rate of return is going to come down. And it has nothing to do with what we're going to do in the account. We're just not investing at those rates anymore. And the wind at our back that we've had is getting less and less. So that rate of return is coming down. I'm not projecting that it's going to fall materially, but if it's 3% next year, that's probably what I can foresee. It is going to come down. Rates are just gearing down here. But the money's in good shape. The account's in good shape. And what I'm going to give you now is kind of an outlook on where I think the next year is going to go and why we're positioning your money the way I am. Everyone's talking about oil. This has been a big factor. I'm going to boil it down to one slide. Now, it's all, OPEC's driving this bus, and I don't want to paint them with a bad brush. They're not the enemy. They're doing what anyone would do. They're protecting market share. However, OPEC, they're worried about one thing. They're really worried about the shale gas in the United States. They're not worried about Canada as much. The United States has enough shale gas trapped in coal. They've got 100 years worth. Now, the economics of getting that out of the ground are not quite there yet. They're coming around and they're getting better. But as it gets better, that gas has always been there. They could never get it out of the ground. Well, they're getting it out now. So they're using their own supply. OPEC is losing their number one customer to their own supply. You almost have to look at OPEC as kind of like the drug dealer. They don't like losing people. They like the price to be a certain level. They don't want it too low. They're selling things too cheap. They want it too high. You're going to find something else. You're going to find an alternative. They want it at a comfortable level. Well, they're losing their number one customer to the United States' own supply. And this chart shows you that the United States is all that shale gas in the U.S. that everyone's talking about. About 80% of it breaks even at $60. So that's the magic number, and OPEC knows that. So they're trying to hold the price per barrel below 60 for as long as they can, and to really try to put that volume growth off on the horizon. They're never going to get rid of it. But what they're trying to do is at $90 a barrel oil, the profits were so fat that you had overinvestment and there was oversupply. At 60 or maybe 70, which is I think where it probably settles at the end of the day, the margin is much smaller. You don't get rampant overinvestment. You make a little bit of money, but you're not piling tons of cash into this stuff where you've got oversupply. That's what eventually is, I think, going to happen. But long story short, you can't hold the price below $60 for half a year and have any damage. It's going to be down there for a while. This is, I was telling clients in January, this is an all-year event. And it may swing into 2015. Prices are going to be down there for a little while. So in Canada, you know, we're not looking so fantastic because that's a huge driver. Now Ontario, the Bank of Canada is expecting that Ontario with this low dollar is going to get back a bit of the manufacturing swagger that they've lost over the last couple of decades and maybe get some jobs back to offset this weakness. No, they're not going to get that many jobs back. That's very wishful thinking. It takes years to get jobs back with the cheaper currency. It just doesn't come back overnight, and we haven't seen anything come back yet. So my point is here, we're going to have a slow go here, and we may see another rate cut. Rates may actually get lower. Now, that being said, my next chart, this is the most important leading indicator I have in my entire business, and it's the most accurate. Out of anything you can have, we pay exorbitant amounts for research that's supposed to be the best out there, that sort of thing. This is the most accurate piece that I get. It's called the yield curve, and it shows you at any given time where the price of risk-free money is. So Government of Canada bonds in red, and all the U.S. Treasury bonds in blue, and you know, goes out for 1 year to 30 years. So right now, there's 2 points I want to make on this. You look at 30-year Canada bonds, paying me 2%. You have to go 30 years to lock in 2% rate of return. That's how low rates are. Well, who's buying that stuff? Like, who buys 30-year bonds at 2%? Not you and I. Those are institutions. Those are pension funds. Those are insurance companies. Those are people that have the liabilities and they know that they have to have that money there. They're forced to buy that stuff. I can guarantee you one thing. I could buy a 25 or a 30-year bond today, and the second I put that trade in, you've lost money. It's that ugly. The second point is that, you know, so my first one is rates are low, and I think they're going to stay low. My second point is the leading indicator that this yield curve is, I'm not going to get into the math behind it, but it's positively sloped, meaning that it's the most accurate indicator of a recession or an expansion in an economy. And it's pointing at an expansion on both sides of the border. Much more prominent in the U.S., obviously, which makes sense. We think the U.S. is actually in pretty good shape. A little bit slower in Canada, but we're not seeing a recession. We're going to have some slow growth here. We're not seeing a recession. We're going to bump along zero growth, though. So that's good news. And the reason rates aren't coming anywhere anytime soon, I think they're going to stay low for longer than we'd like. Ever since 2008, when the crash came, the velocity of money has virtually dried up. People have been spooked ever since. And even though we've had a couple years in the stock market that have been decent, that 2008 event was enormous in terms of how people think about savings and spending. Americans, for example, they've gone back to saving for the first time in decades. And they're putting money under the mattress. They're kind of freaked out. Nobody's really quite comfortable with the economy. And so the velocity of money, the amount that's just, you know, being out there and being spent, has really come down. Well, what this chart says is when velocity of money is that low, you've got no inflation. And with no inflation, rates aren't going anywhere. And I don't think we've got inflation on the horizon, like for the next, you know, my foreseeable future, probably for another 12 months. The one wild card in this is I think the U.S. economy is actually in pretty good shape. And what hurts us, which is the $50 a barrel oil, does wonders for an economy that uses a ton of energy. I think that's a vitamin B12 shot in the arm that they could very much use. I think the latter half of the U.S. they're going to get a boost because of that. They're big users of energy. This is like a tax cut. So that's the wild card. We could get out of this a little sooner based on how fast they grow, but Canada's in for a slow go. So what are we doing the big problem is rates are low and they're going to stay low, and we can only buy bonds. So what are we doing? Well, 2 years ago, I was approached by my two largest clients. Noelle knows them. She's met them at the conference in Toronto. But the city of Fort McMurray and the city of Red Deer both approached me within about a month of each other 2 years ago. It was quite odd, and said, "Look, we've been doing budget reviews, and you know, you're buying us 5-year bonds at 2%, and you're locking us in for a loss. Like, we're building roads, and the cost of capital is like 7. So we've got to do something else here. I know we're within the Municipal Government Act, but we've got to find something else that's going to grow our money faster because it's just not working. We're locking in a loss at this point." So we went back to the drawing board, and we went back to a structure that's existed for over 25 years, but has never looked as efficient as it has now, and I'll get back to why. But they're called principal protected notes. These are plain vanilla bonds by any other means, no bells and whistles. It's a 5 or a 6 year bond. and it's, your principal is not at risk at all, but instead of paying you a fixed rate of return or fixed rate of interest, it gives you a participation on all the upside of an underlying stock market with none of the downside. So for example, the one that we've just purchased here a few months back, we got 80% of all the upside of the TSX over the next 5 to 6 years with no downside. So if the TSX does 10% rate of return, we get 8. If it does 5% rate of return, we get that close to 4. 5% is a slow year for the TSX. 4 would be pretty darn good. We'd still be beating the heck out of what I can get you in bonds. But the reason that we're looking at this is twofold. It's still within the MGA. These are still fully guaranteed. Our principal isn't at risk. But this is an asset that is totally uncorrelated to interest rates. This is something that actually should work when interest rates are going against us on our traditional bonds. When rates start to rise and our bonds are having a tough couple of years there, and it's going to happen, we're not there yet, that's typically because the economy's hot and the stock market is running. So we should have an instrument that is totally uncorrelated to everything else we have and makes money in a time when our bonds does not. Even in rough years, we think that this is going to outperform. Rates are so low right now, the opportunity cost in something like this, the market doesn't have to do a whole lot. So we like these because one, it's uncorrelated, and two, it does something that our bonds don't, and in an environment they cannot. Now, these aren't going to be the be-all to end-all. We're not going to move all of our money into this. In fact, I would cap any municipal account at about 25 to 30% of your money in something like this. The reason being, they do not cash flow. We like bonds that pay semi-annual interest because we use that cash flow. These do not cash flow. We sell them at a gain when the market is up. So we don't realize any money until we sell this thing, in which case we have to have things that have that predictable cash flow because we use it. So it's part of a municipal account. It's not for all of it, but it is something that you're going to see a little bit more of. Our success with these has been really good. The first 2 years we've done these, they worked out extremely well. In fact, those 2 clients that I told you approached me, we bought one, and it was a $20 million deal. We bought, they each did 10, and within a year, and this was just before oil collapsed last November, the investment itself, we bought it at $100. It was trading at 106.50. They were up 6.5% in the first year. The market started to roll over. The oil market started to collapse. It was late November. I was getting nervous. I called the client and I said, look, we were up 6.5%, and in a week we've lost 1% on this thing. It's now up just 5.5%. Let's get out of it, and we'll sit on the sidelines and we can do another one. So we sold it. We locked in that 5.5% gain that we've made, and we just rolled it into another one of these. So that 5% gain that we've made is now their principal, and they can never give it up. And we'll just do it again. So we have the ability to be nimble, and we can get in and out of these things. They're not locked in for 5 or 6 years. Nothing you own is, and that's it. So there's not much that needs to be really done at this point. The account is in good shape, is what I meant to say. The investments are good quality, and things are working as they should. But I guess the bad news that I have for you is that rates of return are going to slow down a little bit. Unfortunately, there's not much we can do about it.
Thank you, Todd. It's an excellent presentation. I appreciate you coming. Is there any questions from the council? And from the financial? Hawken, have you got any questions for Todd?
I don't at this point.
Okay. Any of the council members? Councillor Barfuss?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you, Todd, and appreciate that you're coming.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Todd.
Okay, let's move on. We got an adoption of the minutes of April 7th, 2015. Has everybody reviewed those? Can I get a motion to accept them?
I move to accept the minutes of the council of the whole meeting April 2nd, 2015.
Councillor Barnes, thank you. Any discussion? Call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Any? Passed. Thank you. At this point in time, I'd like to call, let me see. We've got the off-leash dog park and the investment policy. Jeff, where do you feel comfortable in doing the financial presentations?
Give us about 15-20 minutes probably. We'll go through the other items here and then Should be
Okay,
right
then-
on, should
then-
fall right into the agenda.
Have you had, everybody's had a chance to look at the off-leash dog park? Okay, let's have some discussion on it.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Mary.
I would like to know from administration if they had already thought of some area, if we were to adopt such a park, that could be suitable for such a thing.
If I could, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Jeff.
The two that we talked about in the past are, it depends if it's fenced or not, let's put it that way. We have space, for example, on the corner of West Creek Drive and 5th Street. So there's an area that you can't build on, it's at the top of that hill, just on the south side of West Creek Drive. We haven't talked to anybody up in that neighborhood, I have no due diligence into that at all, but that's a space that's relatively open in close proximity to a residential area.
With no current plans for any other,
It can't be built on,
right.
so there's a setback
That's where
there.
Lonnie Lockhart used to live.
Yeah,
and-
correct.
Yeah, right beside
Okay.
Brooks.
Yeah.
So there's that location. A little further out, I mean, we have land around the Agrodome, like the old buffalo paddock, that area. But again, we're now talking, if it's fenced, we're talking huge areas to potentially fence. Now that far out, it may not need to be. But then there's some risks of not fencing it as well, so.
Have we got anything on the East Hill?
um,
Have we got potentially two places, one for the west, one for the east, or whatever?
We don't as a municipality own any big tracts close in residential areas on the East Hill. We would have, well, we lease it out right now. The only land we have, we lease, and it's around the soccer field. It's leased for pasture to somebody. And then we would have smaller space, for example, like at the sewer plant, there's a grassed area there. It's not particularly large, but it's
Yeah.
decent size. And other than that, we don't have a lot of municipally owned land up there.
No.
Councillor Creed?
Yeah, I just have some thoughts on this, especially the idea of fencing an area. It seemed to me that Dr. Griffiths indicated that that was more problematic for, for disease and control, to have a fenced area, to have an unfenced area would be better. We're not a big community, and everybody is close to the edge. I mean, is as close to one edge of the community as there is to the other. Also, I have an observation because I live just above the creek. Over the past weekend, I have observed probably half a dozen people walking their dogs off leash along the creek, along the creek trails. I didn't see a problem with it because they are there, they are still in control. It's not like the dog is wandering at large. He's walking with, they're with an owner. And I didn't perceive there was any problem with them using that, if we wanted to legalize it and set hours, that would be an option, but as far as having a fenced dog park, I don't see a need for it.
Good. How about a need for doggy bag distribution systems along that trail?
Along the trail, it's pretty wild. I don't know. I walk every morning. We walk there. I haven't run into any things on my shoe or anything like that.
Councillor Barfuss?
I'm a little concerned about the idea of dogs being under control when they're off leash in areas where there's other people using facilities. We've had examples in town where people that I would consider to be very good dog owners that generally do have control of their dogs have had issues with citizens that aren't there walking their dogs, they're just out for a walk. So I do have some concerns about that, but like Councillor Creed, my impression from our veterinarian's report from Todd there was that he recommended against doing a fenced park. And then on this report here, it's going on at length about how it shouldn't be next to a public park or residential areas. And I'm wondering where that place is within inside of the town boundaries. Because I don't know where you could possibly put it where it's not either next to a park or next to a residential area.
Well, I live right in the middle of town, and my concern is I see both parties. I see responsible dog owners, and I see the non-responsible, I'd call them. Jeff and I are across the street from each other, and there's numbers of people walk past with their dogs, but they're leashed. And some of them will pick up after their dogs, and others won't. And I don't know, what are your concerns? Do we need a dog, an unleashed park?
Well,
Mayor?
I'm more concerned about the ways that the dog live behind them.
Exactly.
In BC, it is a law to pick up after your dog, and in any large parks, the owners have to pick up after the dogs. And they have bags and pick it up, and they're placed to dispose along their trails, or they take it home and dispose at home. And I think that could be at least a minimum that could be done. I mean, if it is totally in a brush or whatever, that's one story, but if it's on a path, if it's in the, I mean, there is, as is mentioned there could be diseases passed down through feces, and it would be best if they were picked up.
Councillor Barnes?
I was wondering how big is that area up by the old buffalo paddock there?
About 8 acres.
Yeah, I'd have to pull up, I want to say with Councillor Bengry, 7 or 8 acres.
I guess one of the concerns I have is the overly aggressive dogs, and there are some. The larger dogs do have a tendency to be aggressive. I've seen some people walking around town and they got muzzles on their dogs. As soon as I see a muzzle on a dog, I know there's a problem. And obviously the owner's concerned too. And then I see some of these larger dogs hauling around a smaller kid, and I'm wondering, if that dog gets a little aggressive, even with the muzzle, that kid's not gonna be able to handle that dog. That dog's gonna drag him all over the place. But I'm just wondering if that wouldn't be an appropriate place to fence in an area for larger dogs, if they want to be off leash. And I was reading in here that you want to have a double gate entrance or something into that, and I'm not quite certain what the principle behind a double gate is.
Protect the dog when they meet
Entrance,
each other.
exit.
Yeah.
So you don't have dogs coming up to each other.
So, I see what you're saying, so a dog would have to go out one way and in one way. Gotcha. And 7 acres is a fairly good sized piece. And then that might
Pretty expensive to fence them too.
Yeah.
Well, I see
Mayor
that.
Kronen?
Okay. There is a question in the packet that is given to us to explore, is that should there be a society of dogs that can look after this project? And not only look after this project, but if fencing is needed, would they bear the cost of that fence as a service to themselves and their dogs? And I think there is merit in that question, because fencing can become quite an expensive proposition on 7 acres of land. So I really think there is merit in maybe having the dog owners that so badly want that come together, create an association, and start to devise way to finance themselves, and then to decide how to implement a park if that's what I want it to be. Personally, I would prefer it that way. I think it's in their own best interest, and I would take ownership of it, and I will have to look after the maintenance of it.
There's a concern.
It's just an idea.
There's a concern with that, with myself, Mayor, when we talk about a dog club taking ownership of a dog park. It might happen for in the history of things, it's probably happened for 2 or 3 years that they'll do the maintenance on it, and all of a sudden they'll turn it over to the town, you know, and then the town has to worry about maintenance on it. And I just,
Well, I understand where you're coming from, but if there are an entity that is there to look after that, or they look after it, or they lose a park, period. Simple.
I think I would prefer that as opposed to the town dealing with it from day one, including trying to get the fencing all put up and everything that goes with that. Everything else that we've done, for example, with the soccer park and other projects, has been predominantly driven by a community organization.
right.
And I think there's some merit in that, because then you have people in the community that are taking pride in making sure that it happens the way it should.
I mean, the town would be giving the land, or at
We'd
least
be contributing to
we
doing it.
contribute
Absolutely.
in kind, and maybe with supplies or whatever. But I think the main aspect should be done by the association.
Then the killer question is this: do we really need an off-leash park? Or do we maintain the same and try to train our citizens to be responsible owners?
So,
Councillor Peavoy.
you know, it comes down to who really wants this thing, right? I'm thinking, for the most part, it's the responsible dog owners who want this park. I think, for the most part, they want to be protected from the dogs that are just running at large, and they'd love to just take their dog to a safe environment. So I'm thinking the spirit of the desire is a fenced area, right? Because, I mean, if otherwise, why would I change what I'm doing now, especially if I'm up by the agrodome? I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm not a dog owner, right? But I'm thinking if I was, and for years I've been running my dog down by the creek, you put a lovely little park up by the agrodome, guess where I'm going? Back to the creek where this dog's been running for years. I mean, you know, you're gonna have to citation me, or, you know, it's almost, you see, because the other half of that is I want my dog to run, but I also want a lovely experience for myself, right? A nature walk, something pleasant. I'm not quite sure the agrodome idea fits the bill. The 5th Street might, but then we have the problem with all those homes right there. I love the 5th Street thing. I gaze over it all the time. It's beautiful. So again, it boils down to who wants this thing, the responsible dog owners. Who doesn't care? Irresponsible dog owners really probably aren't going to care. They're not going to change what they're doing. They're not going to change where they're currently taking their dog. Or if they do, I mean, some just open the door and say, go exercise. Come back before dark, you know. It's horrible. It's horrible. And then the next question is the intention that we're going to crack down? I mean, if we make this available, is the intention that we crack down everywhere else so that we say, hey, we've provided something? And so, I mean, essentially, we're going to start issuing a few more tickets once we have this thing. So, you know, we just kind of, again, going back to that big picture, kind of like we've talked about with the cat bylaw, we need to decide what it is that we want for the people. Personally, I agree. I think maybe the people who want this thing should probably form an association and really come down with, okay, look, we're not going to consider anything that isn't fenced. Well, now we know. We're not going to contribute a dime to it. Thanks for letting us know, you know, or whatever. Maybe they're saying, no, we're willing to make this thing happen and we can work together on it. So yeah, I'm almost tempted to say, hey, who is interested? Form a committee. I know it's too easy, though, with committees to just let the other people, right, deal with it. So that's a problem.
If I can piggyback on what you're saying, if you give the people, dog owners that are interested, a chance to form an association, they will be driving a little bit of a campaign to try to have as many people participate in their association as possible. They will become the strength of the project by the sheer number they're able to bring. And then we will be able to know how really serious they are with that project. So I would say the first step is give them a chance to organize themselves, to become an association, to have a campaign to have people join them. Then we'll have a sense of the strengths, the number of dogs we're looking at, and then we can start to look at locations and try to understand. We have 3 or 4 right now. That could be possibility And then we have to make a study a little bit to try to figure out which is the best fitting one.
Councillor Creed?
I think what I'm hearing and what I'm feeling is that this really should be community driven. You know,
Yeah.
you know, it's not the responsibility of the council to look after all of the dogs in the community. If there's a concern and a need, then it needs to come from the community. And I don't think we've heard that yet, but you know, if there is a need out there, and like I say, I haven't seen a problem with the people along the creek. And in fact, what's interesting is over the years of my experience of you know, walking not only along the creek but along, you know, past residences, the dogs that scare me the most are the ones that are tied up or the ones that are on leash, because they'll lunge at you. These ones, you know, I passed a guy when we were walking the other day, and he had two fairly large dogs with him, and they were wandering back and forth, and they didn't even look at me. They had plenty of, but I walked, in years past, the guy always had it on the leash, and it would always be lunging at the leash and barking and jumping. You know, the dogs, they seem to feel threatened when they're confined. So I don't know. I'm thinking that if they, you know, can work with what's existing, and you know, in residential areas they're a problem but if you can get them to a, you know, a rural area or a treat area or a creek area, I don't really see a problem.
Well,
Yes, Jim?
One thing I had a note here I'd like a little feedback on as well, and to what Councillor Creed said, the problem is they're all in violation of the bylaw.
exactly right.
That's the problem.
Then you have to
And we
change
just
the bylaw.
passed it,
Exactly
which
right.
doesn't mean it can't be changed, but right now, all those good people in the creek, all those people walking around are violating the bylaw.
That's right.
So I wouldn't mind some feedback on how you want us to enforce dogs being off leash, especially in the creek area. Because I'm pretty sure we could go down, because after 5 o'clock, everyone lets their dogs out, like Councillor Peavoy talked about. So we'll start running evening shifts, and we can probably get 15, 20 citations in a night. And then you're gonna see a need for an off-leash park. But if we don't enforce it, you're not gonna hear a need.
Yeah.
And
So we need
unless
to
we
figure
enforce
out-
there, we won't need the off-leash park over here,
Right.
so.
Yeah, so there's a bit of a chicken and egg here, to some degree. But at the same time, you have a whole bunch of people, well-intended, well-mannered dogs, but they're violating the bylaw.
Exactly right.
So if we think back to when that, we put that into the bylaw, it was because of the conflict that we were running into with people being in the same area as off-leash dogs.
But some people have been attacked by dogs in this town.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
And honestly, we cannot pretend it didn't happen, because it has happened, and not only once, more than once, that we know of, that has been reported. So that's an issue.
Absolutely it is.
Well, I'll give you an example. On Saturday night, just before our state was having a conference, there was a couple who were walking up the highway on the sidewalk. And there are a couple who would be petrified if a dog come after. Consequently, a dog did come after him, but it come across the highway from the north. And it was yapping and screaming and yelling, and I saw it in my van and got out and was ready to kick it to death. But it backed off. But they were scared to the point where they went back into the community and went up another block. So what do we do about the senior citizens too, who can only walk a block and a half or 2 blocks with their dog, and they want to return their home, but they still want to have that exercise? Do we make them take it to the off-leash dog park, or do they still walk their dog on the streets?
If they're on a leash, they can walk them on the streets.
Walk them anywhere if they're on leash.
That's right.
I think, I think, you know, the whole intention of our dog bylaw was to help give our enforcement officers some teeth when dealing with these problem dogs. You know, and I think there's a little bit of judgment we were expecting and granting to our enforcement officer to say, hey, that dog's not a problem, that dog's fine, that dog's cute, you know, but that one is threatening people, and boom, pounce, and people say, well, why are you picking on my dog? it's almost gotta be a judgment call where we trust our enforcement officer to say, I'm sorry, your dog was threatening people, and, you know, because it's gonna lead to this unfairness. Well, you didn't, that dog was running, playing with the kids by the swings. Well, that dog was licking the little baby's hand, you know, your dog was chewing on this guy's arm. So, it's hard to write that into the bylaw to where it is unfair. It's gonna be unfair. It's unfair now, because we're not writing tickets, period. So the minute we write one, what about all the last couple of few years that all this was going on? So it's, yeah, I mean, we're in a pickle.
Mayor Kronen.
If you remember, the whole idea of the off-leash park came from a fellow that did a presentation, lives on the 5th.
Steve Walsh.
Steve Walsh, yes. And he said that when he let his dogs out, they go on the main square there, and that's where they exercise. So then we told him, well, that's not the place to do it, and then there were neighbors that really feel threatened by his dogs. And so he said, then why don't we have an off-leash park somewhere where we can exercise our dogs? Not have them on leash, but exercise them, which a dog needs, like a human being.
And that's why I've said I'm not opposed to us having an off-leash park for them. And I'm still really struggling with the fence or not fence, because we're getting both sides of that, and I get the safe place and all of that. But I really think it needs to be driven by, you know, somebody like Steve or somebody from the community.
If they're gonna be fencing, you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, the whole dog leash park needs to be driven by a group of people such as Steve.
You know, I would like to make a recommendation to ourselves, to council, that maybe we enlist Steve Walsh to look at creating an association for an off-leash park and see what he can come up with to begin with. And let's try to give him 2-3 months and see where we're going with that.
So,
I was gonna say, the principle of an off-leash park is just that. Any dog that comes in that area is allowed to be off-leash. So if people come into that area knowing that it's an off-leash, and they've got
Was a good
dogs on their leashes, and then they have a problem with it, then they're gonna have to be notified that this is an off-leash park.
Yeah.
There are other areas in town that you can go and walk your dog. And so, you know, the Creek Trail, there is an issue with that. It's a great place for an off-leash park. It really is. There's a lot of people that don't have dogs that like to walk there. And so, you know, it's just really difficult to designate that pathway as an off-leash area, because eventually there's going to be a problem down there. And I'm certainly not prepared to let the town be liable,
Anyway.
right? So we got to find, maybe that off-leash area is still up by the Agrodome.
What recommendations do we want to make to administration?
might I suggest that we don't have to actually make a recommendation to council, but maybe just give administration some direction to contact Steve or a couple of those guys and see if there's some appetite there to form a group to do that.
Yeah.
I'd also like to know some prices. If we're going to fence it, what would it cost roughly to fence it?
Well, but if
I
they're going to look after
I
it.
think we should be letting the organization.
Yeah, let them check it out and look into it.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are ultimately going to have to do it,
Is there,
fundraise and all.
Jeff, at this point in time, have we researched out any grants available?
No,
But
I did.
that would be,
I did have some fairly preliminary, I pulled up a few costs, and I just used some projects we've done in the past, but, for example, if it's fenced, if we did an area that was, and again, I used the pool fencing, we wouldn't need it that high, so I reduced the cost, but 5 times the size of the pool fence, it'd still be 50 grand. And things like a pet way station are $1,000, signage $500, trash receptacles $500, those things would start to add up. Even things like with the bison paddock, we gotta build parking, so we gotta put in drainage, we gotta put in culverts, we've gotta build approaches. There's a number of things that would still have to be done there. So I see it as a $60,000 touch,
Yeah.
if it's fenced. If it's
Councillor
fenced.
Peavoy?
Somebody with more experience than me, maybe that's Jeff in this regard, but what would it take I mean, we're not really seeking permission. If we went with the Fifth Street, we're not really seeking permission, we're kind of just notifying, and then we're just eminent domain because we're the government.
Who are you? Where's the people I know?
Is there, no, I'm just saying, like, is there really like some whole one frustrated homeowner right there on that view that says no, and they kill the whole deal, or what, how's that roll?
Oh, you can go put whatever you want on that property. I would just suggest immediately adjacent to residential that would be fenced.
Yeah.
You know, that's not an appropriate one for, in my opinion, just my opinion, I don't think it's appropriate for just a non-fenced off-leash because it's so adjacent to communities. And what a lot of the feedback we got is that's an area that kids run and play football and do all that. Well, if you've got dog feces all over the place, that's a pretty bad idea.
Yeah.
All of a sudden you have what I would suggest is a fairly incompatible use. I mean, we have large areas, although again, I guess it's under lease too. Never mind, I was gonna say even the West Industrial, but that's all under lease for cattle by another party. My gut says nobody's gonna drive that far to walk their dog.
That's right.
But, I
That's
don't
my
know.
problem with Agrodome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I keep thinking about what I would do if I were a dog owner. I don't think I'd drive all that way. I'd make it to Fifth, that would be a fun place to go. My other problem is this, I'm a little worried to put this on Steve. I know Steve, he's a good friend, and, if I owned a dog, I'd be the first one he'd call and say, help me out with this. And I just, knowing me, I'd say, why bother? I don't see, again, there's no motivation, unless we start ticketing. If we start ticketing now, or we set a date and we say, as of, September 1st, everybody gets a ticket. And then we gotta move on this, we gotta make a plan. So I don't know the best way to do that, but I can tell you this, right now, the way it stands, zero motivation, right? Why would I bother? Because my life is great right now, and I don't want to see anything change. I don't need your little dog park. I'm great, I could do my business down at the creek. My dog's business.
glad you cleared that up.
There's a bylaw.
It's a fun.
There's no one way around. So, where are you gonna take it? You want to put it on the dog's collar?
Oh, that's another issue that you still have to deal with.
apprehend the dog.
Like my dog loves to go out on a leash and explore different areas and mark her territory. And I don't think in an off-leash area she'd be happy. For one thing, she'd be attacking every dog that came across. She's very aggressive.
Yeah.
Even with a muzzle on.
Mayor?
It seems to me then we only have two options. Or we look into the area of having a group, an association look after that, or we have to change a bylaw and allow for dogs to roam around along the creek from this time to that time at their risk. But if there was an issue, I can tell you they will come back to the town and we would be liable.
Well, I don't want to see dogs off leashes on the town square. Yesterday, there was probably 250 kids up there playing balls.
No.
And also children running around in the park area up there and, tippy-toe through the dog feces is not a good plan.
No, I'm talking along the creek, I didn't say on the
Well,
trail.
same down at the creek, we've got tourists that like to get up early in the morning and
So
go walking.
how are we going to solve that issue then?
Councillor Creed?
Well, I think we need to make sure that the dog owners are still responsible for their dogs, no matter, whether we designate an area as off-leash or what. We have to be able to keep the responsibility upon the owner. I don't know that the town, would have to assume responsibility for people's dogs.
If somebody is bitten, you would have a bylaw that said you shouldn't have the dog off leash.
Unless we designated an area at a particular time as an off-leash area, then, because that's what the bylaw says, unless in a designated off-leash area,
Then
right?
we have to put signage up saying this is off leash
They need proper
thrower
signage,
between
yeah.
6 and 9.
Well, that goes without saying. If you're gonna designate a spot, you're gonna have to put signage up.
What is,
So, just know that and understand it.
Jeff, what is the responsibility of the town if there was a casualty?
But I'd have to look into it to be exact.
Solve your problem in a couple of days.
Generally, if you're following your bylaw and policy, generally, I will say that very loosely, you are okay. If the bylaw is prudent and, reasonable
And enforced.
and enforced, yeah.
That's where we fall short right now.
So I don't know, I'd have to look at the legality, the legal liability of that specifically of an
What-
off-leash park.
Yeah, if we don't have all those answers to make a decision, it's very difficult, so maybe.
Maybe we need to have administration look into the liability issue and see what it is before we can make a decision.
One last thought. When we're talking about times, roughly the best time to be out there running your dog, like after work hours, 5 PM to sunset or whatever, those are exactly the hours that pedestrians without dogs also want to be using that area.
Exactly right.
So, I mean, I hate to say, creek's off limits to all the rest of you during that prime, perfect time. Come in the morning.
But
Right.
to be clear though, it's not off limits to them.
Right.
They
just
still
need
have the
to
right
know
to use it, they
there's
just
dogs.
would need to know that there is the potential there. for there
Use
being
at your
dog
own risk
population.
then, huh?
Yeah.
Bring your taser or whatever, defend yourself.
I'm just concerned, Councillor Creed mentioned that, he sat there and watched that's what's happening now. That is what's happening.
Right.
And there's no signage, there's no warning, so we do need to do something.
Councillor Barnes, you're ready to make a recommendation to administration?
Yeah, I'd just like to recommend that administration look into the liability issue so that we have a better idea of where we're going before we make a decision on any particular area that's going to be designated. Because without that knowledge, we can't really do it properly. That's my feeling anyways. I mean, I prefer that area down the creek for the off-leash area. That's my feelings. But I think we need to know what the liability is first.
Can I ask quick, Mr. Chairman, are you still wanting us to pursue, solicit a couple citizens that may want to undertake a bit of a citizen-driven initiative on this?
I would like to
Is that still the
Yeah.
primary
I
wish of the
think I'd add that
council?
to the recommendation.
Okay,
That goes back to our previous what we as a council need to give to our administration is the blessing to go ahead and start enforcing this bylaw. And, somebody's got to be the bad guy. If we're saying you cannot have your dog off leash, we probably should let the citizens know, as of this date, we're going to be enforcing that, toot sweet.
Perhaps we should have some more information as far as what we're going to be providing as alternatives to that before we
Yeah.
start.
I think that's what I'm saying in my recommendation, is that we need to find this out first. I don't want to be the bad guy jumping all over guys giving them tickets if we're intending on making that the area.
Okay.
So I think we just need to move on that.
Good discussions, Jeff, have you got enough that you can go forward?
we'll pursue a couple of these things, yeah.
All right, thank you.
One thing, Mr. Chairman, if I could, would council be okay to jump to 7C and D right now?
I was just gonna say, because of
I
what
don't need
mine
to
has
keep
been
talking
here-
in Noel all night.
Yes, I prefer if we move C and D to the top. Let's review the investment policy, number 1-45/45. Is there just for information purposes? Is this not right, Jeff?
Yeah, just as Todd was here tonight, I thought you have, so you know what the policy is, and if you have any questions, by all means,
So no changes are needed.
no,
Okay.
it's just there because we were having this discussion this evening.
Excellent.
Is there anybody that would like to discuss any part of that policy? Do it now. Real quick one.
Okay.
I think the policy's pretty clear, and from what I have seen and watched, it's followed very well by CIBC, and I have no concerns.
The only concern I have is we've had this one broker since 1983, There's continuity there. Do we need to look at 2 brokers?
Why?
Or,
Why, no?
Well, whatever.
If it's not
So,
working, we'll fix it.
to put it into perspective,
No.
managing accounts like this don't pay large amounts of money. Okay, they work on a fairly thin margin. You start splitting that account up, you start splitting that account up, and you're not gonna get attention
No.
from either side of it. It needs to be managed as one.
I was very impressed with his presentation. I'll tell you that. All right,
Accounts are secure, let's not be
we're
worried.
gonna move into item 7C right now. You'll notice that there is some financial statements and stuff like that in your package, but Hawken is just, there's some changes that had to be made. I'm gonna ask Jeff if he'll do the honors, but we're not gonna do it line by line. We've already done that, all right? We will not review our financial statements line by line, but there is some changes that we need to review and go for.
So what I'd like to start with council, and if you would all use the print one you were given, there are some changes from the one on your OneDrive, as we looked it over a bit today. So this one I want to start with, this is the budget document, and we'll get into the mill rate following that. So it has Town of Cardston 2015 final budget update.
This one here.
We use the term loosely with final, because chances are we might be tweaking something, but yes, we've been calling it final for a few days now, and it's changed a number of times.
Today is fine.
Yeah, for right now it's fine. What you'll see is what you're presented in December, where you have every line item on the left. The light gray is what was in there in the end of 2014. The dark gray is what it is today, and so if there's nothing in the change column next to it, it didn't change. A number of these changes are simply, we got the actual requisitions in, or we had carry forwards from 2014, so they're fairly minor and normal. What I would like to do, and I feel very confident, flanked by Noel and Hawken here actually, I feel like we can answer anything, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to just hit on a number of the changes, and we won't hit on them all because some of them are immaterial, but I'll hit on anything. We also have a couple of pieces that I'd like some input from council on, because what the process can be, what I hope it will be, is we'll have this discussion tonight. If there's anything that needs to be changed, that you see that we didn't hit a priority or something's not right, next Tuesday is when I'd like to pass the mill rate. So we've brought you, and in your package, that hasn't changed. The mill rate proposal that was in your package is the same. We also have some options to look at as well. So we want to leave here tonight knowing that council's relatively comfortable with this mill rate scenario and with this budget, and then we'll bring back the bylaw next week, would be our hope. So, without further ado, and I apologize, I'm going to be flipping between my final update because I had some notes on it that I need before this one, but what you'll see is a couple of things of significance, and we'll start right at the top. As you recall, we don't get the grants in lieu of taxes for the villa, so that was adjusted out of the overall. We had that revenue was in taxes normally. We got it as a grant, but we put it as tax revenue, so that's been pulled out. Requisition. And this was a surprise. The school requisition is $43,500 lower. So even though provincially overall it's up, our formula for Cardston specifically brought it down from last year. So that was a good surprise. I should mention, when we're looking at sources of funds, anything in brackets would be an increase to the revenue, which seems odd, but if it's bracketed, it's an increase to revenue. So we had a couple minor things as far as matching requisitions. The other one that was a good surprise is MSI operating, so 107,841. When we budgeted in December last year, it was on the assumption that MSI operating was getting cut by half. And then when it came out, it wasn't. So that got us another $93,000. We have an internship grant and a couple of small grants that came through that we've added now that we know them. Summer jobs grant and the internship stuff is all there. Permits, 112522 has been increased. We had a large electrical permit come through from the school, so now that we know it, we've just accounted for it in the budget. The miscellaneous, we added in a couple of pieces of revenue we expect to come in. The biggest one being that apprentice loan repayment. Some of you may recall we apprenticed our mechanic. He left us, and under that he has an obligation to repay the apprenticeship costs. So we anticipate the end of this
That's,
month getting that. Cole.
Cole?
Yeah.
What's the Festival of Lights donation?
So when people donate towards that Festival of Lights that started last year, we are the recipients of it. We take the funds because we can issue the charitable donation receipt. We become the owners of everything they purchase, and then we give them the money to do with it what they will. So over the page, and I'm going to jump over stuff that's relatively insignificant, but if there is a question there, please stop me. FCSS 151840, there's just some carry forward from 2014. The rest of these are really just reflecting either averages or more realities, so nothing too major there. So page 3, this is one of those pages where almost everything is just stuff coming forward from once we've done the audit for 2014. We knew what could come forward to fund other things, so you'll see a huge list there that are just things coming forward. Anything, excuse me, what was it here? No, that's fine, we'll leave that. Matching requisitions.
Tell me about the street materials one, the 40,000 leaving in reserves for crushing.
Okay, so what that is, last year we taxed $40,000 to crush some cement. And we're not going to do it this year. So we had that, when we first did that is almost more for us, I guess, than council, because I hadn't seen an iteration of this, but when Hawken and I first did that, we had the 40,000 to come forward in 2015, but we don't have enough cement to bring in the crusher this year, as we've looked at our inventories. So we've just taken it back out of revenues for this year. It'll sit in reserves and we'll use it in 2016.
Okay.
So that's why that changed.
Okay.
You will see, basically, now we get into the uses of our operating funds in the bottom half of that page. And so we have things such as, now in this case, the brackets are actual more expense, and the others are credits back to that. We adjusted council fees and per diems. At the request of council, we've tried to adjust this to reflect what the total expense would be if everybody claimed for everything. So we know that, so we have a better feel for the dollar. If we come in under, we'll reserve the surplus and fund the next year. Use it to fund that same account. And then also you'll notice at the bottom, there's tweaks to all the different wage benefits and different rates for different things based on changes we made to payroll.
Jeff, can I just ask you, just for my own information?
Yep.
Who is now on the administration salary for 2015? Is that you? Is that parking?
It's a bit of a piece of a lot of people.
So anybody that does some administration work within their position, that goes there? Okay, fine, that's what I want to know.
Everyone's broken down by different percentages, so it would be a culmination of a lot, isn't it? I mean, admin hits on.
No, so it's not a fixed, one person, two person.
Right now, it's all of Hawkins.
It's the three of you right now,
Mine's
right?
split out 8 or 10 ways, I think, isn't
Right.
it? Yeah.
Okay, so it represents contribution of many people towards administration.
Yep.
Thank you.
Page 4. So fairly minor stuff here. The biggest one on that page is the 212503. It's the server upgrade. We decided to capitalize it, to fit under capital rules, so it was pulled out of operational, moved to capital. So the net effect on the budget isn't anything.
And the audit for next year is the same as this year?
Well, we have to, we put that in for now, but we have to tender it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted. So that's
Yeah.
about what we're aiming for, is about that figure that is here.
Yeah, we use the same number, but time will tell.
Hopefully lower, but.
Yeah.
Yeah,
hopefully.
but that's a cap for
Yeah.
us kind of idea.
Yeah,
So I didn't realize we were under budget 6,000 on cups, so
Yeah.
that's great.
yeah. So over to page 5, unless there's any questions there. Again, these are all fairly minor. We changed the lease amount with the fire building, so there's a couple little tweaks in that. Why you will see some changes, and I'll use this because you'll see this a number of times, 232100, Public Works wages. It's down $62,000. That's a result of a number of things. One is, once we know our capital and we've kind of got our projects figured, we take some of that labor and allocate it to the capital job. So we're still paying it all. We've just moved it from operational to the capital. And we'll fund it from capital revenues, what we have to pay for capital, I should say. So it's also a combination of changing some things in the organization, but the bulk of that is we've moved it to capital projects. So you'll see some of those changes. The net effect on the budget is nothing, but we've moved them within the budget.
Jeff, can we get down to the street materials and
We
the
sure
crack
can.
filling and the crushing?
Yep.
Boy, I'll tell you, those are a couple of big items there.
Yeah, so what we did is we took out the 40,000 in crushing, because when we talked to Tim, he felt there wasn't enough inventory to mobilize that guy to come down. It wouldn't be a very good rate per yard of the stuff to mobilize for as little as we had. We took it out, but we've put some of it back into crack filling and oiling. So not all of it. We took 20,000, we took out 40, but we bumped up a couple of those accounts with 20,000 of that. So that's the story on that account.
Crack filling is gonna be
Increased by
effective?
20.
Well, it's more effective than not doing anything. I mean, not to be cynical, it just simply is. We've had varying degrees of success over the years with it. We have a different contractor doing the majority of it this year, because we want to see how his product is. But yes, it beats the alternative of not doing anything.
What are we doing about the separation from the asphalt to the curb? Right along the edges of the asphalt to the curb?
But you would do about the same thing. I don't know exactly what they're doing with any specific areas. But
Yeah, because there's a big disaster happening the week there.
Okay.
Especially down 3rd Avenue.
Okay.
Right across the street here.
Okay. But so we bumped that up a little bit more, taking out crushing for this year. You will see crushing for 40,000 back in the budget next year, and then we'll use what we didn't spend 2 years ago to bring the guy in to do 80,000 worth of crushing. So that's how we plan on working that. I shouldn't be presumptuous and say that's how we'll do it. That's ultimately what you guys have to say. But that's our plan.
Just real quick on that crack filling, maybe it's just a perception, but I think I've noticed that the crack filling material is a higher grade than what we've had in the past.
It's different. Yeah, it's I don't know technically what it is. We're just trying it because it is different.
Yeah.
And we've had varying success on previous stuff. So we'll see, but it is a different.
I was just looking at it today.
Yeah.
So
It's a lot thicker.
it's thicker and,
More tar used.
Yeah.
So we shall see.
it's not more like an oil like that other.
It's a
seems more like an
plastic-based
oil.
product from what I understand. So
Yeah,
that's what the
we
new
talked
stuff
about-
is a plastic-based product.
Yeah.
We talk about
We'll
crushing.
find out whether it's.
We'll find out
better.
whether it's good, yeah, if it
Okay.
does.
We'll sweep it a few times and grade it a
Help
few
eliminate a
times, and
few
then we'll see.
potholes.
When we talk about crushing, we have a huge pile of stuff up by north of Arden Drapers, across from 12th.
Oh, yeah.
Is that ours?
That's gone now. That was
Yeah,
from
it is.
the
It's gone.
elementary school construction. Ward Brothers had to haul that out.
Yeah.
Or did they-
We shouldn't have any brick or cement there
It's
anymore.
gone, it's gone.
Yeah.
No, I don't think you're talking about that. You're talking about, there is some crushed gravel there.
Oh, north of Draper, sorry, yeah, that is our aggregate, yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so we'll be sitting on a pretty good inventory of pit run and gravel this year. So it's not like we necessitate this crushing to be done, because we bought $175,000 worth of aggregate this year.
Yeah.
So we're okay for inventories.
Okay.
I don't even know if I want to get into 232502. Huck and I are having some long discussions about this account. We've decreased this account, the expense, because it normally ends up, we take some machine time that we use for capital projects and credit this account. Huck and I, for next year's budget, are going to maybe be addressing this different, but sufficient to say we've decreased it 20,000, which is the better way to go than having to explain why I've increased it 20,000. Page 6, this one's all really minor. Again, there's just, the big change is simply just water wages, because we've included credits for capital, and the same thing with sanitary sewer wage. Everything else is fairly minor. We did add $5,200 at the airport, 233-100, for line painting. I'm gonna probably do that as late in the year as we can, simply if we can come to some agreement with the county to share costs at the airport. I'd much rather share costs with them at the airport.
That was a question I had for you.
So we've got it in the budget, but that may hold off until September, October. Page 7. We are at, again, this one's not a lot on this page. There is a large amount. This was the balance left over of the solid waste study, so it was already funded. It was a grant. We've just pulled it into 2015 from 2014 after the audit.
Meaning we spent it, now we're just
No,
allowing it.
we haven't spent this yet.
We haven't spent
So it was unspent at the end of 2014, so we brought it forward that we will spend it in 2015. So there was the revenue for it as well.
So what's that gonna be used for then?
That is in the implementation phase of the Solid Waste Authority Best Practice Study.
Okay.
So, Councillor.
That was a great way of phrasing that.
What the grant says is that it's for the implementation phase. We'll see how that plays out, because I don't know if they're going to accept many of the suggestions, but that's a debate for,
Did we get that study?
yeah.
Did we as a council get that study?
No, they're still going over.
We haven't fully accepted this.
Well, yeah, I think all I want is a summary, really, so I'm looking forward to that.
Well, they're not quite yet there.
Yeah, no rush.
Very soon.
I just didn't want to have missed it. I went, whew, that came and went.
Everything else is fairly,
Page 7, that FCSS plans to spend.
Yeah.
All funds carried forward from
Well, they
2014.
have to. They have
yeah,
to.
they're
If
required
they don't
to.
spend it, they
Yeah, they
lose it.
lose it, yeah.
It's like the.
So that revenue showed up on the revenue side already.
So they have to have a program.
Is there a time frame that they have to use that? Like when did they get it?
Within
As
a
opposed
year.
to now that we're gonna spend it.
Accumulated over
There's a
13 and
couple of years,
14, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Technically, if you don't spend it
Within
Within a year,
year,
you lose
Within the
it.
year?
you
They normally
can
cut
lose
back.
it. But
Okay.
Alexis has talked with them and they're gonna allow her to carry it forward.
They
so
said don't do it again.
So
A
we're kind
year.
of lucky to have it carrying forward here, so.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
So page 8 is also, a lot of it is just carry forward from 2014. You'll see that under Planning General, 261200. There's a number of things that weren't fully paid out in 2014 that will be finished, or the projects that are happening in 2015 that were carried forward from 2014. Plus there's the addition of the solar study from EcoSmart as well. That's in there.
Can I ask you something? Regarding the insurance for the Historical Society, can you tell me something about
Can you
it?
give me the line item, Mayor, just so I have
It's
that?
under 262200.
Oh, okay, yeah, right.
Can you tell me something, why it's gone so up? That's for Councillor Edmonds, he'll be happy to see that expense.
I don't suppose I know, a lot of our insurance came down this year, but that one was one that when we got it in, it was up significantly.
On
I
the
don't know why
museum?
It's gone up. They break out on the invoice what the different charges are for. And that happens to be the breakout this year. And I haven't asked any questions to the insurance company on it.
I think your reasoning for something like that, Councillor Edmonds would probably know better than me. But when you look at the museums, the pieces of, the artifacts that they have in there, most of them are irreplaceable, and so they're high-ticket items, and the insurance is gonna reflect that, the replacement.
Yeah, but it's sitting
And where to find those
small
replacements.
over 1
Yeah,
year, it's a lot of money.
Did we file a
It's
claim on
almost-
that one piece?
Which one?
So didn't we loan one to Calgary or something and then,
Yeah.
no?
This could be somewhat elastic from the hail damage too, potentially.
Well, it
Just
could
seeing
be a
it coming
consequence
forward
of
now.
it, yeah.
So that was a pretty big claim. Other than that, fairly minor, if you go over to page 9.
Sorry,
Yep,
on page 8, last line.
yep,
Tourism and Economic Development Member.
yeah, that falls over to the next page.
Oh, maybe that's why.
So, yeah,
Still
the
nothing.
change there was under wages.
See 'em there.
The change was
Yeah,
under
it's
wages,
just-
that next line falls
Just
over
under
the next page.
$500
It didn't
yeah,
separate
which is not what
nicely.
it is.
Right. Well, actually.
Is that, did that answer what you saw?
If I may, I'll just interject it here because we've arrived. We're finally there. While we met last week in council, Chamber of Commerce was meeting without me. Had I been there, I might have been able to curb some of this, but they voted very passionately to start a petition without coming to us first. And they wanted it to be a legally binding petition to fight for an economic development officer in town, shared with the county. They believe they're going to get their 400 to 500 signatures just of local town people, and they want this council to take action based on that. I told them, talk to council first, let me talk to council first. We can look at it, but they've already talked to the county briefly. The county's in favor of it. I don't think they need to twist our arm and enforce a binding,
Why
The
do we
intent
need-
has been to, if the county agrees with the shared services
Otherwise,
agreement
but
to
to
do
have
that
it.
we were gonna do that.
Exactly.
So
What we're going to
what's
see
the
probably in the
purpose?
next 7 days is petitions on every business countertop right by the till. And they're going to be asking for signatures, they're going to certify those signatures.
How's it worded?
It's actually, it's twofold, it's two parts. One, that we partner with the county to get an economic development officer, fighting for local,
So they're
economic
gonna
development.
legally bind us to partner with somebody else.
Well, no, they're going to ask us
And
to.
are they going to have a requisition to
Second.
bind the county to pay for the services that they're using down
They're
to?
going to go get 500
Is that
signatures in the
something they're
county as
going to
well.
have that
They're going
too?
to get the same amount of
Well,
signatures.
I'll be
in the
glad
county.
to
I
hear
guess what I'm
that.
curious about is why raise the ire of all these people when it's pretty much what we wanna go forward with?
It's what we
Exactly, I
want
told
to
them,
do.
I said, you
Yeah.
guys don't have any more meetings without me. But no, I didn't say that. I said, we're already moving forward on this.
Yeah.
But anyway, it came up in the budget. If it's something we're moving forward on, the other one is a little harsher. They're really worried
I don't
about
understand.
Main Street vagrancy. They're saying our biggest problem is we don't have the rights as businesses to hire, we could hire, they want the town to do this for us, to hire an authorized peace officer, someone who's actually legally able to handcuff a person and wait for the RCMP to come and get them.
Those people aren't breaking the law.
No, they're talking when laws are broken, So they want someone better than a bylaw officer who can just,
Councillor
take a
Peavoy.
photo. I'm just reporting real quick
Yeah.
on this budget item, right? So
But
there's a
at the
couple-
same token, I've had discussions with our administration,
Right.
and Jeff is looking into a consortium
Sure.
that can maybe deal with this. And
Right.
Jeff, do you want to deal with that right now?
And,
No.
working in partnership with the county,
But
right?
can we finish the budget maybe
Yes.
first? Can we
Right, so-
stay on track?
I'm just a little bit concerned over this petition.
Well, like I say,
Let's deal with that at another time.
Yes.
I'd like to spend
Thank you
time on the
for the
budget here.
information, but maybe
Right.
what we should do
I
is
think
finish
what
the
they're going to ask
budget.
us to do is put it into the budget. So if we pass this on Tuesday, they missed their opportunity, but,
But the intent under the shared service was to apply for a regional collaboration grant.
Exactly.
So that the financial implications were minimum for the first 3 years.
understood.
I mean, that was always part of a strategic
Oh, yeah.
planning, so I
If I
don't get
may,
it.
let me speak on behalf of them and what they're thinking. They're thinking, we don't care what you guys were trying to do. We're not seeing anything happen, so now we're asking you to just do it. That's what they're saying. They get that we had a plan and that the plan isn't coming together perfectly. Meanwhile, all they see is we don't have an economic development officer and we still have a vagrancy problem, and we're talking about a crime problem.
Could we maybe, in the future, make sure that we address that issue? There was something in the Herald yesterday that will be well to be read by all. And
yeah, I read it.
especially by the Chamber of Commerce and to be given to all the merchants. I
Jeff,
think
can
that
you
will
put this-
be a good education
Can you
piece.
put this on the next?
I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
No, but you may
There's
as well be
500
fair.
signatures on the way. I think they're going to get them. They're going door to door, they're going business to business. We're going to be having this discussion in a couple of months, but just be aware, it's coming. So,
Anyway,
No, I had
we
that
should
as a
finish the
suggestion.
budget.
by the way, I'm sure if we were to talk to them about this issue, we could put it to rest this week, and you won't see those petitions out there on the street.
Well, they can petition. I'll put my neck out there and say it's highly irresponsible of the chamber to go ahead and try and do a binding petition without first coming to the elected officials and asking what the situation is.
I told them
I
that.
find it highly
It's
irresponsible. That's just
absolutely wrong.
What they're saying is they're
It's
sick and tired of not seeing
frustrating.
any work from our...
Council, can we move forward? We'll have this on the agenda item for our next council meeting.
My point of views are very, very ill-advised.
Okay, let's move on, please.
So this page, I think we're on page 9? Yeah, that's right, we started with the memberships up top. Really, the changes here is we took a little bit out of a number of accounts to fund the collegiate steering committee, the money they were looking for. So that's what that basically is, and some insurance tweaks, nothing major on there. Page 10, oh boy, those are all pretty small as well, just reflecting actuals. We added some, we have to fix the water fountain up at the soccer park, you see that $4,000 addition there. Other than that, those are all pretty minor.
What happened to the water fountain?
The plumber that installed it never installed the frost-free device, and so it froze the first winter. Don't get me started about that.
Oh, my goodness.
Page 11,
Is there any recourse back on him?
I don't know, you had any at the museum? So there you go. No. So we have just some minor adjustments as we got invoices in for the year. Now, I want to talk about 272762. This is, we have a number of recreation transfer to reserves. I shouldn't say number. We have 2 or 3 that automatically we put in every year. For example, the Zamboni, the tennis court. We've added a couple, and I want to run these by council before we set the budget. We have added a golf course reserve. And the reason for this is that I am, and I think all of you are concerned, that despite everyone's best efforts, when we get the golf course back, chances are we're going to have to put a lot of money into it. And I don't mean to say that to disparage the current operators, but I think the fact of the matter is we're not going to be left with a surplus of assets when it comes back to the town. We will be left with the minimum amount of assets that were required, and that's fine. That's the agreement. But our feeling is it's going to require some cash to transition over, if it's just finding people to run it, if it's getting, replacing some aged equipment in that first year. Our concern is that if we take that back, whether now or in 20 years, it's going to require some cash. And we don't have anything put aside for that. So in our recreation reserves, we've added $10,000 to put into a golf course contingency fund, is what we're calling it.
You're thinking
Jeff,
that would be an annual.
And as an annual contribution, yes.
Councillor Creed?
Is that thinking about the hill stabilization as well, or is that other, or are you thinking just equipment?
General operation of...
We weren't, but I see where you're, potentially if yes, all of a sudden in a few years we have to replace hole 16.
Yeah.
I suppose we have a little bit of seed money there to go towards it.
Seed money would be.
Seed, well, maybe pun intended there, but yeah, there would be some seed money. So yeah, maybe. We are going to have financial obligations to the golf course, whether it's due to hill slippage or whether it's due to needing to transition to take it back. There's going to be costs. So we thought it may be wise to start putting some money away, and hopefully we don't need it for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years.
40. I think it's a very wise move.
Okay. The other one that we had is, we had budgeted to replace all the players' benches at Redford, and what we had budgeted previously, we haven't been able to find enough to replace all 4 for that money, so we're asking council if we can put another $5,000 in that reserve to try and get that done.
They're in pretty bad shape, are they?
Yeah, they're getting time, but they're going to need it redone. They're at that time, I should say.
Is it just the wood?
It's the structures, it's the size, it's a number of things. Now, our men's softball have decided they want to try and step up and raise some money for it as well. So we'll have a partner there, and that's excellent. So we'll see what capacity they have. We're hoping that with this addition and what they can raise, we're close.
Covered.
We're hoping it's a short-term thing.
It's not a vandalism situation?
No, it's not. It's
Just
not.
age.
So
Yeah.
they're looking into maybe using plastic this time rather than wood?
Well, or cinder block
Yeah.
is what
That's
Randy's
probably
looking
the
at, is
best.
going with cinder block.
And are they removing the signs off the fence?
Yeah, that's how they're gonna start. They wanna take that back over and get all those down and start putting new ones up and charging for that as a way to raise money for this.
Good.
That's their plan. So those are the 2 items there. We had, we talked already about Festival of Lights. You saw the revenue side. This is the expense side. It's just a wash. And History of Cardston project, you'll remember Don Godfrey got that grant, which is coming through us, so there's the expense of it. Page 12. This is all, well, I guess there is some big numbers at the bottom, so not much at the top, but the bottom we need to talk about these 3 numbers, because we're going to come back to these, so kind of keep in a mental note of page 12. Bottom of the page, we have 3 transfers to reserves. We have additional to pool reserves, we have additional general reserves, and we have Lee Creek Bank rehabilitation. Noel or Hawken, if I say something that isn't totally accurate here, jump in. But essentially, the reason we put these three in, these are new, is that at the end of the budget, we have $290,000 cash. And we need to have some discussion about what to do with that cash. So we have assigned it to 3 different areas. One of them I feel quite strongly needs to stay, and that's the Lee Creek rehabilitation. We applied to the Small Communities Fund for a grant, but we would have to come up with $100,000 as part of that grant. So we would like to reserve that money so that if that comes through, we're ready, and we're ready to go ahead. So we feel that that's a prudent reserve to have. We haven't budgeted the expense in this budget because we simply don't know if we're going to get it. So at this point, we're proposing that we would budget the reserve, and if we get the grant, we will come to council for a change to budget the expense when we can bring a financing plan for that project. The second one is addition to pool reserves. The theory here is that in this budget, we happen to have some cash, and we know that when we do the building, we're going to have to borrow. Do we take the chance now to reserve this money, put it away, and borrow that much less potentially when we build the building or renovate the building? That's the theory behind that one. And then the 50,000 is really a general unspecified reserve. This is one that could be played with if you want to choose to make some tweaks to the mill rate. So let's say we change the mill rate that brought in 20,000 less in revenue, we would take the 20,000 out of this reserve. So that's a bit of where if we want to slide some things on the tax on the mill rate, that's the account that's going to be affected with the offsetting either income or reduction. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on those 3, so we can
discussion on them?
We can have, I mean, as we get into mill rate, they're going to come back into play. Because if you want to make changes to mill rate, they're going to affect those accounts. Okay? So that's, I just want you to be aware, so they're going to come back in the conversation.
So, Jeff, for the Lee Creek Bank rehabilitation, that would help us to maybe have a matching grant or something like that?
We have committed this
leverage?
much in the Small Communities Fund. So if we get that grant, which
That's
was...
what we have to come up with.
It's a 2.8, 2.9, 2.8.
We went all in on that
So
thing.
that's a leverage for us, that's a
Yeah.
way to leverage our money.
Wow.
So
Part of it was MSI.
part of...
Yeah, we're using
The way
MSI
that
in
that
piece.
grant funding works is it's 1/3 federal,
Right.
1/3 provincial, 1/3 our funds.
Right.
Now, we can utilize our
MSI
provincial
reserve,
grant
yeah.
funding as our 1/3 portion,
Or use this.
but the
And
fact
use
is,
that.
we don't want to
And use that.
we don't want to use up all of our provincial funding for this, because we have a lot of other
Okay.
projects that we use it
So it
for.
helps us to raise a little bit more money, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So, that is the...
Just a quick
Oh,
question.
yeah.
On the pool renovation on the building.
Yeah.
I can't remember what was the cost on that if we were just.
We don't
don't
know,
have it.
because we haven't put it to
Ready.
tender.
Okay.
No, right now, we've pretty much, and you'll see in the budget, we've consigned that in 2015, we're gonna get the water slide and everything else to do with that whole outdoor piece done.
Right. So
And
this is put off for a year or so.
For 2016, we'll bring back tendered costs
Mhm.
for the building.
But you will have the engineering done.
Oh, we have money in
Right.
to finish the engineering, yes.
Right.
Yeah. There's-
You have
Is it-
50,000.
Yeah.
Is it a total replacement or is it addition to?
Yes and yes. It is a small addition off the north, and then it would be gutting everything but what's load-bearing in the existing
But we
structure.
leave the walls?
Everything load-bearing stays, yeah.
Okay.
Footings, we found when we excavated the pool that those footings and the cement work is so oversized in there
Good.
that we didn't want to touch it. Just getting rid of it is a massive chore.
Yeah.
We couldn't hardly break it. We had to bring in a breaker so that we could even get the pool dug. So we're better off just leaving it.
Yeah. In the long run.
Yeah, it's very good condition. We've had it inspected. It's in great shape. So there's no point tearing it out and pouring new cement.
Yeah, well, that's good.
So that is the operational income and expense at this point. As you know, we then take some of that cash that we raised operationally, we move it into fund some of capital. So we'll go through capital relatively quickly, and then we have a capital funding sheet we can touch on quickly, and then talk mill rates so that we have some direction going into next week. So page 13, are we okay on operations? Good, okay. What you're gonna see is a lot of this is just carry forwards. So it was stuff that was either not finished, or there's projects that some of you will recognize have been around for a while. But sorry, if I go to,
Can you maybe help us understand what 232762 is on the first line? Is that a piece of equipment?
John Deere backhoe.
That's a backhoe, right?
Yeah.
It's a piece of equipment.
where was that one, sorry?
That's a $160,000 one.
Oh, you're down in the sources, okay.
Uses,
So that's a backhoe.
uses, not
Oh, yeah, we're in
sources.
uses, yeah, okay. Yeah, I guess we should talk sources quick here. So top of 13 will be our sources of capital funding. It's really all our grant funding, anything that was unspent that comes forward. So you can see that as it's listed there. I don't see anything too out of the ordinary. So mostly just carry forwards and grant funding now that how we're gonna fund all that. So let's go to uses of capital funds, bottom of 13. The server upgrade I talked earlier just came from operating to capital. Other than that, it was carry forwards from the previous year. So page 14, we have carry forwards. We had some, you see on 242762, we had a lower and a higher estimate that washed each other out, so that no net effect on the budget. Carry forwards, a few extra little things that since December we've needed to add to capital. And that's really what there is there. There's not a lot.
The water slide.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it came forward,
But it
so-
wasn't in the preliminary, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
It just came forward.
yeah. So that's that's all of our uses of capital funds. So that takes us out to the balanced budget based on the mill rate that we've used, that you have the chart in front.
Just on the water line extension, are we pretty confident then we're moving forward on that in this year?
I would love to tell you I was confident on that. We are moving, so are you talking Atkins or West Industrial?
Atkins.
Atkins, I don't know if I'm confident on that. It's really where he's at. He's talking like, yes, that's happening soon.
That's great.
But we have not agreed on what that looks like. So the quick story on infrastructure for Atkins is we have the sewer and water extensions, but we have not come to an agreement of what that water and sewer infrastructure looks like. In fact, we are in disagreement on a couple of items. So,
He still wants to take it up over top of the hill, right?
yeah, there's a disagreement on the looping of the water system, so we've suggested we want it to be able to flow so that it evacuates and we don't get stale water. He disagrees with that for cost reasons, of course, it'll cost more. And then the sewer system that he's proposed, Albert from AE is suggesting we don't have anything to do with that. So we still have a ways to go on infrastructure there.
I thought we already got him to commit to the looping as one of the terms. No? It wasn't like a written signed
It
agreement?
wasn't one of the conditions of subdivision. But we have to approve the infrastructure because we take it over. So that conversation's still forthcoming.
Where are we sitting with our irrigation line, coming down the golf course road across the park and so forth?
It's all done.
It's all done?
Oh yeah, we used it last year.
Operational?
Yeah, we used it
Now,
last
are we
year.
gonna continue that up our Fourth Avenue to the temple and so forth?
We've given them a quote for the engineering and the cost extensions and told them they'd have to be a major financial participant,
The temple?
the temple. So I've left it with them. So any questions on that, council? That was I know it was relatively quick, let's call it that, and we just hit the changes. All in all, we'll talk here in a minute on mill rate. We have a little bit of cash that we can reserve for those upcoming important things. When we brought you the budget document before, you may recall that at the back there was some important projects that were unfunded. This gives us a chance to put a little bit of money towards, especially that creek project, which I think is going to be a high priority for us soon. So I'm pleased with it. We used on this sheet that you have here, so this is our mill rate sheet, worksheet that we use. So if you jump right to the 2015, Are we okay to jump into mill rate? Is that tied in
I
nicely
got a
enough?
quick question before we move on.
Yeah.
Maybe a silly question, but I remember when we did our budget last year, we had Lloyd put off buying instead of buying 2 or 3 of those speed signs, we put it off, we bought one. Is that back in here yet? Is there room in here for one?
No.
And we talked about, a garbage recycling container, buying another one of those.
But there is.
And I haven't seen that in here.
It is in a
The
budget.
bin, yeah.
There's one in there.
There is
There's a
one
bin?
Garbage, yeah,
for
under
cardboard.
243.
What is it?
Yeah,
Yeah, there is one.
762, yeah.
We've already ordered a cardboard bin and a garbage bin, and they should be here.
Okay.
Yeah, it
All right,
says
gotcha
that
now.
in there.
But not the light, not the
Want to
speed
speak
thing,
to the
no.
speed sentry?
But it's, yeah,
Yeah,
he has 3 of them, or 2 or 4 of them.
I'm just trying to find the account here.
221, I think, or I believe
I'll go under, a few under
Right
capital.
here. So it's account 221201, it's on page 5. It's at the top there. Security initiatives is what we've called it, it's cameras.
What is it, 2?
221, 202.
Yeah.
Very top line in page 5.
Top of page 5.
That's what we had in budget last year, and we didn't spend it all, and we carried it forward.
Okay.
And we're including it in this year's budget.
So cameras, et cetera, that, even the cameras, is the speed thingy? Is
No.
that what you call that?
Something
Cameras
else.
are the main street.
I don't know that he's planning on buying another speed sentry.
Okay.
He has 3
We've
of
got
them.
I know he asked for 3 last year, and we told
Yeah,
him.
but we mounted one permanently, and then he's got another one he can move, and I think that's working.
He's okay with
Yeah.
that, okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? in
Any
that?
other questions on this? And let's move into the mill rate.
Okay, so 2015, you'll see that you have 2 boxes highlighted in yellow. Those are the mill rates that the budget was built on. Councillor Barnes, you got that one there? There you go. So to cut to the chase, here's what it equates to. If you go over, you will see a % change in total mill rate from previous year. On residential, it's a 1.95% reduction in mill rate from last year, and on non-residential, it's a 2.5% reduction in mill rate from last year. But if you keep going across the page, you will see change in municipal portion from previous year. What we looked at is on the average. Now I want to emphasize that. On the average, total assessment divided by number of properties. The impact on residential homes under this mill rate is 1.06% increase, or $14 a home. For non-residential, it is a $44 a non-residential property decrease, or 1.58%.
That's based on the assessment.
That is based on the municipal assessment, just the municipal portion,
Right.
It
because
does not,
one of the reasons why,
Oh, this would be overall rate, wouldn't it, Tom?
Right.
Isn't that the way?
Nope.
no, it's just municipal portion.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't
so
factor
that
in the
doesn't
school.
include the
and,
education
Yeah.
and.
So, where the education one, the requisition came in lower, so this reflects
I
that?
heard it was going up.
Okay.
No.
No.
Came down.
No.
Came down.
No.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It came down, so this reflects where it came down.
So
Your school rate,
it's 2,
if you look under,
0.4423.
right next to both of the yellow boxes,
Yeah,
so for
on the
residential,
bottom.
it's 2.4423, last year it was 2.5050.
right.
Yeah, so it's
And
come
then
down.
here's your
percent. Or-
So the combined is that first, so at the top it says % change in total mill rate, just the mill rate, not assessment, but it's that 1.95 and 2.51 reduction.
Yeah,
That's combined both the municipal mill rate and the school and the seniors mill rates.
that's right.
So that's the overall. But we've tried to look at it in real dollars and say, okay, well, just looking at the
Just
municipal
reduction.
portion, what does it do to my tax bill when I get it? So on the average, and based on the average property assessment and average tax, I would be average at my home, I should expect on the average a $14 increase in my municipal portion of my
Did
taxes.
you make a comparison, a comparative chart between low, medium, high assessment income?
We did look at a couple of specific properties. I will preface by saying it's a very difficult comparison to make. because none of our homes assess the same, and some of them may move, some of them may have sold, some may be in different condition, but we did. I have it here, don't I? We did take a
That's what we did
sample.
last year, we looked at the sample, didn't we?
Yeah.
And the sample is not a bad thing. But what I'm wondering is, there is quite a nice decrease for the non-residential, and businesses will be happy about that, I'm sure. But is it the balance, a $14 average for residential as a hike, and a non-residential a decrease of 44? You chose that formula. Can you help me understand why you chose that, maybe not reduce it? I think we had said we wanted a 1% increase, and we were okay with 1% increase. It's a little bit more than 1%, it's really negligible.
Can I just take a guess on that? If we took out all of those savings for the commercial, we'd still end up with $12 increase on residential, is that?
I don't think so.
Say that again, Councillor.
Well, I'm just saying, if we took away the savings for the non-residential, so the commercial and business, we took away, and we applied that to the residential, it would only drop it from $14 per house to like 12 or 11 bucks.
Because,
we did that.
Such a small percentage
you view it as
of the total.
the total assessment, which
What are our option sheets? Oh, yeah, that's right, summer.
the residential is definitely 6 times greater than, yeah, you're right, it might be just a couple dollars, maybe nothing.
What you see though, when you get into these samples, is most of them do have an increase. I mean, that, like Jeff said, that is totally an average. We
Right.
see, there's one of our big commercial properties that had a $15,000 decrease in assessment. So that one is decreased. We have some that have a big increase. One of our larger assessed properties. But looking at these comparison sheets, based on that, you still see an increase of, 2-3%, which isn't big dollar volume, but, so.
We had a
overall-
decrease in the mill rate, but a increase in the,
Because of
On the
assessment.
Right, to the
sample,
assessment.
on the sample properties.
right.
Yeah,
Just to your question, if you look back on the history, the residential mill rate as a percentage of the non-residential
it's
mill
gone down,
rate.
down over the years.
No, it's been consistent.
Consistent.
Right.
So we've always had a fairly consistent, the residential municipal mill rate has always been about 58%. It's been 57 or 58% compared to the non-residential.
Okay.
And so we've stayed with that
Kind of.
consistency in this year. And that's, we could up the non-residential and lower the residential. And then because if you're looking at this here, your residential went up $14. Your non-residential went down $44. So we could tip that scale.
A little bit.
We could.
Well, we did that in a scenario here.
And we've run a few scenarios, but anyway, we wanted to keep that ratio the same.
$14.
That's why it is this way. You could come up with a million different scenarios.
$14
But that's
is
an
not gonna
average.
kill anybody, it's an
No,
average.
that's an average,
But
okay.
the thing I like is we're looking at our business people and saying, hey, we're trying to give you a little bit more break all the time.
But some
think
will, but
that's-
some
It's
won't.
not really, because the
It's-
ratio's still the
No.
same.
It does,
Yeah.
Yeah.
some will have a break, but some won't.
But we're staying pretty close to the 1% that we said we were going to increase, at 1.06%, so it's negligible.
Yeah.
It is, it is the same.
But what I'm trying to remember, had we put that in a motion that it was going to be 1% or not? And I remember talking about it, and
I
I'm
believe it was
wondering.
up.
if we-
I believe it wasn't.
No, no, it was one.
Did it get put into a motion, Jeff?
But
Yes.
this is what,
It wasn't, it was just a
Wasn't a motion.
recommendation?
No, I don't see why a council would make a
You can't make
motion
a
way
motion on mill
before
rate.
budget as to what you want your
Yeah,
mill
well,
rate
that's
to
what
be.
I'm,
But there was some discussion, agreed.
yes.
Before you
Yeah.
see the assessment and
Yeah.
mill rate.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that was a discussion toward establishing the.
That's where we
budget
wanted to get
That
to.
we wanted to,
Yeah.
no more than a 1%.
I think based on the budget that we passed, the preliminary budget that we passed,
I
the
remember that
result was gonna be a
discussion,
1%
really.
increase, and
Right.
we were all okay with it. We passed that.
Well, and I think that when you look at this, considering other communities are going to 4%,
No, but I mean,
we're
I'm
doing pretty good
pleased,
here.
I'm pleased with what we have. It's still a mill rate of altogether 9.92.
One thing we looked at, and maybe this is a bit to your question, Councillor Peavoy, we looked at a scenario where both of these on the average were 0. So the residential wasn't up 1% and the non-residential wasn't down 1.58, how that played out. So it moved the non-residential mill rate to 12.77,
Which is fine.
which is up, it would be just a bit up. The mill rate would be a little higher than last year, and it moved the residential mill rate down to 7.21. So we did try and look at scenarios to say, okay, well, what if we just made it so the on the average again? Because when we ran our scenarios, the ones we happened to pick all saw increases. They all see increases. So that obviously the ones we didn't pick saw decreases to get to an average, but we still have properties that will see tax increase based on their assessment. We had some
That's
commercial
right.
properties that had huge assessment increases this year, huge. And I don't know why that changed exactly this year, but they're significant, and they're gonna see that on their tax bill.
Yeah, we did have the one that
Go ahead,
decreased, but that was
Councillor
an
Morris.
assessment decrease.
Okay, I just wanted to make a comment, if I remember the discussion that we had had last year about wanting to be able to have money to be able to put aside for future projects, that we wanted to save some money and have it. If we didn't go this little bit of an increase, we wouldn't have that money. So I think it's wise that we go this way. I'm pleased with this. Because we don't want to be borrowing all the time. We want to be self-sustaining, and I think this budget gives us that.
Well, not only
More
that,
of a
we don't want,
self-sustaining type of a budget than.
we don't want to put ourselves into a position where we have to, one of these years, increase by 4 or 5%.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, and the mill rates are actually decreased, as Jeff pointed out. on
Yes.
both.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
the,
all in the assessment.
Count
the
everything
mill
assessment
rate,
in
the
there.
mill rate has decreased since 2011
but-
on both sides.
In all
But
honesty, the citizen doesn't care. The citizen
Right.
cares what the bill
What
says
the
on the
bill
end of it.
says,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
And the mill rate is what we're using to do the calculation with.
And it's
They couldn't care
essentially what
less.
I care more of is what do we offer for the
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 service.
taxes that
Yeah.
pay. That's more what I care about.
Councillor
Good
Creed?
question. Jeff, what happens, you mentioned, some of these businesses got a big increase in their assessment. So what happens, if they get their tax bill and then they go back to the assessor and appeal,
They can adjust.
the assessment? I mean, how does that,
It would only
affects
change
the
next year.
overall.
how does that affect that?
It affects
our total
It affects revenue.
revenue?
Yeah.
Because if their tax bill
That's
is
what I'm saying,
revised,
if
They
they,
have till the end of June?
they have 30
1 month.
30 days.
30
from the time
days
it
to
goes
still
out,
appeal
so
their
so if they
60
appeal their
June
assessment
20th,
and then
60
it gets lowered, then does that,
60,
that
okay.
affects our bottom line as
But
well?
are those
Not a lot.
businesses that seen some renovations or?
Nope. I mean, we have one that had a 12% increase in their assessment. Right? So, of the 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, of the 5 we took using this mill rate, so we had, is this the percent, no, that wouldn't be. That's the percentage in tax increase, okay. So we have, here's a business, I'll use an example that assessed at $261,000. Their assessment went up $14,000. So with this mill rate dropping, they will still see a 2.79% increase
The total tax.
in their total taxes, which to them represents $122.
Yeah.
It's not crazy,
Exorbitant.
but
It's $10 a month, it's $10 a month.
Is the onus on the assessor to justify that increase?
Yes.
Yes, I can contact the
There's gotta be a
assessor.
reason. that it
so
would-
we tried to look at some different
Provincial
categories.
guidelines on it, yeah.
But
So-
2.79% is only $122.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not gonna hurt.
So we did have another business, for example, whose assessment went down $15,000, and they will see a 3.48% reduction in their taxes, which equates actually to $890.
They'll
It's
be
a high
happy.
assessment, right? Well, relative to what they pay, they'll be
Yeah.
relatively happy.
Yeah.
But, you know, we saw some very low-value businesses, some of our older businesses on Main Street, one went up $5,000 in assessment, which equates to a 5.26% increase overall, but it's $60 in actual money, it's a $60 increase. But based on their assessment, it's a 5% increase, because they're very low assessed.
All right, but every resident or every business has a right to ask for explanation of their assessment anyways, so.
When we looked at residential properties, those increases were a little smaller. So if I took a home similar to mine, you guys I think all know where I live, and it's about the same assessment, there was a 0.73% increase, including assessment change, which was $11.83, $12. If we look at a new home, and this one we know actually sold recently, so this is a newer home, their assessment went up $14,600, so that's a 2% increase or $74. But we also had this last one, it's a 1970s, 1980s home, custom home, mid-80s home.
Yeah.
Assessment went down $2,200, so they'll see an $80 reduction or 2.7% reduction. So the residential are all pretty tight, within a few percent of the ones we sampled. They're all within a reduction of 2.7 to an increase of 3.7. But that 3.7 was also on a really low assessed home, real dollars, it was $32.
That's a very old home.
So it was a very old home, but it still saw an increase based on the sales.
Jeff, are we getting more home-based businesses in town?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head. I just don't have that in front of me to know.
Okay,
So we did look at scenarios of both non and residential seeing, or looking at a 1% over 2014, a 2% over 2014, zero change. So we looked at one, for example, where we would keep the 1.58% reduction in non-residential and then make residential zero.
and what does?
So the cost is 21,000. I shouldn't say
So
the
of
cost,
lost
the less
revenue.
revenue, we take in 21,000 in less revenue. If we went to saying on the average, residential will see a $0 real dollar municipal tax increase. And we keep the 1.58 reduction on non, that costs us 21,000. Changing them both to zero, now that increases non-residential,
Right,
that's, it's still, we take in $11,970 less. Just because we're
So that's
more heavily weighted on
$32,000 less.
residential. Well, that's just on the one scenario.
Yeah,
We don't add those two together.
okay.
essentially what we need to decide is, do we want to have an increase for the residential, yes or no? We had said, when we start discussion December, that we could bear a 1% increase. We felt that would be reasonable,
And that's where we're at, pretty close to it.
and we're pretty close to that.
We're somewhere in between 0 and 1%.
As long as our
Which
assessments don't go up.
is, which is,
And again, on the average. Some homes are gonna see 3 and 4%, and some are gonna see that in reduction.
and that is the difficulty to help people understand that even if we say, yes, we in average 1.06 increase and a decrease for the non-residential, people don't understand it's an average, which means that some will pay more.
We have a scenario where he pays
And some-
almost 4% more,
Yeah.
based on that.
And there could be some over 4% if their assessment took a hike because of
That's
recent
right.
sales of that type of.
Right,
Yeah.
and so we don't drive the assessment. The assessment is what allows us to understand what the revenue will be, depending on the rate.
But to those
we put.
people, we can always tell them, it's because of your assessment, or it's because of, this year, it's not because of school, but.
Right,
it's
this
not-
year
it's
the
not because
school
of the
is
town,
not
so,
affecting
you can
the
always-
Chinook, a little bit, because we don't have the tax in lieu of anymore.
Councillor Lawrence?
Yeah, Do you take into consideration the new homes that are coming online in this budget?
Yeah. So when you look at, if you look at 2015, the top left-hand corner says total of 321,015. So 321,015,000.
Yep.
2014 was 313,000, so there was 6 million in new assessment.
Okay.
A lot of that was to do with assessment increase, and then it's also the new properties that we can tax.
But the new homes that are just being built now.
Yes, that's what I'm meaning.
No.
Not
That's
built
what I
right
mean.
now, sorry, no.
That's what my question was, maybe I didn't make it clear
No.
enough.
There is an increase in there. In the amount that we are raising for municipal, for the town tax portion, there is an estimate for how much new assessment.
But the actual assessment won't take place until
That was
16.
as of December.
Right?
That was-
Yeah, it's as at December
Oh,
31st of
yeah.
the previous
So-
year.
Last year.
So that's
Yeah.
last year's we're working on, but so
Yeah.
next year,
Yeah.
they'll come online with
Yeah.
a full assessment.
In
Well,
2016.
to what status they are at the end of
Yes,
December. Some of
yeah.
them have done some.
It depends on the completion level
Yeah.
at the
But we-
time.
If they're
the
in
assessment is
in
done.
construction.
Well, there's a lot of them, because the weather's been good, that are online,
Yeah.
are coming along pretty doggone fast right now.
So you remember I mentioned earlier those 3 reserve accounts?
Yes.
If you want to make changes to the mill rate, especially in reduction, we had that 50,000 that we were just calling general reserves.
Yes. Take it from
So
there.
we would pull it from there and drop that amount
Right.
to offset the lack of revenue. That's the easiest way. It's certainly not the only way. You can cut any line item you see in the whole document. That's at your discretion.
Yeah.
Any other comments for administration?
Where is
Bill,
that?
right?
Maybe touch
One
on
other
that.
thing,
That's,
yeah.
It's in the capital, it's
Yeah,
like second
it's
to last page.
Capital uses.
Uses of capital.
212,764.
There you go. That's right, I should also mention this, I didn't mention that. In 212,764, page 13 of your budget document, again, sorry, it was one that it didn't change much, so I didn't bring it up.
Which one is it?
212,764, council approved capital. You'll be familiar, that's an account we've always had for things that happen, a water line breaks or something happens, you can approve for that use. That 50,000 of the general reserves, that's above and beyond this 69,000 of council approved capital.
We're getting some significant savings, or savings in building up.
Yeah. So we still have that council approved capital at your discretion. And that's separate from that general, that general
Now, I might add,
50,000.
we have some economic development things that we're exploring
Right.
that could very much
Oh, yeah,
need
we
some
can speed it up in a
capital.
hurry, yeah.
That we could chew all that up
It
real
has
fast.
helped. It has helped in the past to have some contingency there in that account and between the.
I like
cap
having that other
policy
50
reserve
there
that
just
left in
because of
that
what
too,
could
in the end.
potentially happen that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, I don't think we want to take away from that $50,000. I think that we're right in line with what we had discussed, where we wanted to be with that 1%, and I don't think we're out of line there. And I think it helps us to have that reserves, rainy day fund, if you want to call it that, and I think that that's only wise that we do that. We're all counselors in our own home to do that. So as a town, we should be doing the same thing.
Mayor?
Okay. I really would like to congratulate administration and the financial department for having brought that budget. I mean, we can see that there is no redundancy. There is some reserves. We need some reserves. Times are tough. A little better reserves will help us cushion the difficulties that we might face in the months to come. We don't really know what will happen until tonight late. And so I would really put a recommendation that we approve the budget as presented with the mill rate of 7.2860 for municipal, for residential, and 12.5623 for the non-residential, for the municipal portion of it. And that's the municipal portion. The school, we have no say to it, and the seniors, we have no say to that. But that's a recommendation that I make.
Jill, have you got all that?
Probably want the total mill rate in
Can
there.
you
So
read
to
that?
The thing is
approve,
that we bring it back via Bible.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's true,
Right, so
yeah,
it's
that's
fine.
true.
Yeah,
Yeah,
It's fine.
this is the-
It'll come back as a bylaw.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you fine with that, council? There's our recommendation to administration. Is that what you need, Jeff?
Show a
Need
thumb.
to take a vote for.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Or recommendation?
So like I said, council, we will bring back the mill rate bylaws, and we will also, you'll have to approve, as you recall, 2 budgets. You approve the budget, and then you approve the budget with amortization.
Yep.
So we'll get all that prepared, and we'll get the bylaw prepared for next Tuesday. It's a quick turnaround on agendas this time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate
And I
it.
don't see you with new
Again.
pair of shoes on your feet.
Okay. We'll just,
So that was
Yeah, you know what, if
the
you
mill
want.
rate. So you need a motion to approve the budget.
Councillor.
I'll make a recommendation that
Yeah.
we approve the budget as presented to us.
okay,
Okay,
good,
all in favor?
thank you.
Yeah, because the mill rate is based on it.
Thank you, Finance
Thank you.
and Jeff.
Way to go.
At this point in time, I'd like to say that we give you a 10-minute
Oh,
recess.
we've got some sandwiches downstairs too.
Okay,
You wanna do that now, or?
let's take a recess right
Do you want
now.
to recess and we can go grab that?
And then, yeah,
We'll finish it off.
go ahead.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we recess for 10 minutes.
Okay,
All in
all in
favor?
favor? Go for it. Is 10 minutes gonna be long enough time with sandwich?
Going to be
I think so.
Councillor, Peavoy, who is the executive at the chamber?
Right now,